Hey guys, Karin here. Welcome back to LittleArtTalks. Today I want to talk about two books by Sarah Thornton, and they are 7 Days in the Art World and 33 Artists in 3 Acts. Now I've talked about 7 Days in the Art World before, and if you saw that video, you already know I like this book. It was her first book. It was also very successful. It was a bestseller. New York Times said it was one of the best art books of the year that it was published. 33 Artists in 3 Acts is her newer book, and it was published in 2014. Just to give you some background, Sarah Thornton was the chief writer of contemporary art in The Economist, has a BA in art history and a PhD in sociology, and I think her background kind of shows through in both of these books. Both books are pretty similar in style, both about contemporary art and are kind of written in the first person, describing her trips to visit and interview all of these artists and different figures in the art world. She does an incredible job of describing these artists, what they're worried about, what they're interested in, what they don't care for, and so on, even down to things like what their studio looks like, what they wear, how they hold themselves, and how they speak. I think in that regard, her sort of sociology is very apparent, and that's kind of her way of distinguishing herself from other books on contemporary art. Both have a really strong theme about persona, perception, personality of artists and people in the art world. Let's start off with 7 Days in the Art World. And both of these books kind of have a really interesting format. Like the title suggests, each chapter describes one day in the art world. So the chapters are divided into sections like the auction, the crit, the biannual, the studio visit, the magazine. So she goes to each of these different spaces where art is made or shown or sold. It's also pretty interesting because this book was published in 2009, and the years leading up to that, when she's writing and researching for this book, it's kind of a crazy time period. The market was exploding. There was a ton of money and publicity and so forth going on in the contemporary art world, and a lot of that is captured in this book. So it's a very exciting, specific time. It is a very glamorous, exclusive look into these rich people's lives. And I think that plays a big part in why people are so intrigued by this book. So if you're not into that, you might find it a little bit annoying because it definitely has its gossipy parts. But she talks about all sorts of different roles in the art world: artists, gallerists, critics, auction houses, and so on. In the chapter The Crit, she goes to CalArts and attends a critique. And then in the studio visit, she goes to Japan to visit Takashi Murakami. Since there's only one day in each chapter, it's definitely a slice of each place. Obviously, each critique is different, each studio is different, but it is pretty interesting choices, I think, for each chapter. This book gives you a pretty good idea of how the art world is connected in this sort of complicated, often contradictory, but necessary and very insular kind of relationship, and how there's a lot of anxiety about hierarchy or position in the art world, marked by money, fame, education, institutional affiliation, all of that jazz. It really does feel like an insider's perspective of the art world. Moving on to 33 Artists in 3 Acts. This book is written very much in the same way, kind of the same fashion, where she goes to different places and interviews these people, describing what she sees, how they act, and so forth. But this one focuses much more on the artists themselves, whereas the previous one is really interested in relationships and stuff like that. Again, this book has an interesting format in terms of how the chapters are laid out, which is suggested by the title. There's 3 acts, which are sort of topics that the book is divided into, which is politics, kinship, and craft. It kind of jumps back and forth, mainly between 2 artists in each act, but there's additional artists in each chapter besides the 2 main ones, but they add more perspective, different opinions. To give you an idea, the first act is politics, and the 2 artists that it goes back and forth between are Ai Weiwei and Jeff Koons. And if you know anything about those 2 artists, you know that they are kind of polar opposites. Ai Weiwei, who is very outspoken about politics. It's pretty much the main focus of his artwork. Jeff Koons, on the other hand, is very non-confrontational, I guess, about politics. He doesn't like being controversial in that way. And it talks about how artworks are or are not political and whether they should be or shouldn't be and so forth. So in that way, I think the book is super interesting. If you thought that 7 Days in the Art World didn't have enough stuff about actual art, this one is kind of a great alternative. I actually think I like it better than 7 Days in the Art World just because there's so many artists and it has such an interesting format in the way that it discusses these topics, and I think it's really interesting personally. There's also an incredible roll call, if you will, in this book. There's a ton of artists I absolutely love in this book. In addition to the ones I've already mentioned, which are pretty famous, some of my favorites include Gabriel Roscoe, Wangechi Mutu, Grayson Perry, Yayoi Kusama, but really all of them are so great. They feel like really candid interviews. It really does feel like you're in their personal spaces. A lot of these interviews are in their own homes, in their own studios. They're very conversational as she weaves between these very heavy topics, descriptions of the studio, and descriptions of the artists themselves. So if you like contemporary art or you're not really sure if you understand contemporary art, I think you should check this book out because there's so many artists in here with all different perspectives. It really shows you how there is so many different arguments and how there's no real right answer, but it attempts to answer these really difficult questions. So yeah, I definitely recommend both of these books to check out if they interest you. Hopefully I did a good enough of a job to describe these books so that you actually know if it's something you're interested in or not. Let me know how I did, and if you already have these books or if you read one of these books, what did you guys think? I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you did. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.